I don't want to sort of obliterate anybody's questions, but one of the things
Mm,
I had wanted to talk about a bit more, and we didn't get to it, but
mm,
is this very fascinating legends of how Asanga
mm,
discovered how he was taught these five texts by Maitreya. And I just wanted to put it out there. Of course, we know that this is not a this is not what the Chinese tradition sees as. They have a different set of the five teachings of Maitreya, which don't include the Gyu Lama, which the Chinese believed was composed by somebody called Saramati, who was perhaps lived even a little bit before Asanga, but is a very
mm,
shadowy figure. We don't have too many details. There's one other text that's said to have been written by him. But these very interesting and very touching legends of how Asanga, as a young student monk in up in Afghanistan, basically in Peshawar, was sort of found it very easy to understand all of the Mahayana sutras and teachings that were available, except the Prajnaparamita, and therefore he sought guidance. And very, very interestingly, it looks as if these legends describe him having some sort of an empowerment, where his flower fell on Maitreya as his kind of guiding deity, which is again, according to what we would see from an academic point of view, that would be a little bit anachronistic, but why not?
mm,
I think we should keep a very open mind about it. But that's what led him, of course, to undergo his many years of retreat down in the plains in India, or in this site, which is said to be perhaps this Kukutapada mountain somewhere near Bodh Gaya. And it's a fascinating story with an awful lot of detail and even some, verses that what he was said to have said at different points. And we don't know where all that comes from. It's presumably some sort of an oral tradition that accompanied one of the five texts when they were brought to Tibet. But the three texts that were brought in the early period and the two texts that were brought in the later period, we can't really tell which ones these legends came with. I suppose the Abhisama Alankara is the sort of more likely of the five. But I find this legend and its details extraordinarily interesting and moving. And again, it sort of highlights the whole, it starts with the time of Asanga's mother,
mm,
when she could see that the teachings, particularly the Mahayana teachings, seemed to be in danger of disappearing. This was, of course, when they had, in some sense, only just begun. And she felt that it was really necessary for her to do something, and the best thing that she could think of doing was to, bring up sons who would be really great scholars. And of course, that's exactly what she did. But uh, I would be really interested if anybody ever finds evidence of where they came from, these legends. As far as we know, they were first written down in some of the early Tibetan histories. I couldn't find earlier traces than there's these two histories written by uh, one of them written by Kepa Deyu, which were only sort of only came to light, you know, 30 years ago, perhaps. Um, I think 13th century. So before that, we don't have any trace of these stories. Of course, rather cynical academics might say, well, they were just, invented
mm,
by somebody. They're just stories. But bearing in mind, how reluctant Buddhists are to um, create anything new. There's this very strong sense of transmission and lineage, and you don't add things.
mm,
You transmit what you receive. I would be a little bit surprised if anybody really sat down and sort of wrote those stories or invented them. Of course, they can
mm,
grow organically and expand. But anyway, I just want to say how fascinating I find them, and how meaningful they seem to be in many ways. You know, Asanga's sort of quest as a metaphor for people really wanting to find out what something means and being determined to do so. And of course, Asanga had these incredible difficulties. Not really, we could all sympathize with that. I spent myself years in retreat, and it's kind of frustrating. You hope you have this romantic idea that you're going to really come out completely transformed and different, and of course it takes a bit more than that. You know, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of other ingredients. And so one can really sympathize with Asanga's difficulties, and then the idea that in the end, you know, Maitreya was with him all the time. It's a sort of wonderful metaphor for Buddha nature, you know, but his obscurations were too dense for him to perceive Maitreya. There's this wonderful story I heard in one of the oral versions of that account. I don't think it's in any of the written versions, where Maitreya even shows him his Zen, you know, his robe that he was wearing rather close to Asanga. When Asanga would spit, you know, the Maitreya would sort of catch it on his robe, and he showed him the stains. You know what I mean? So I think that narrative is a wonderful kind of background to the text itself, and its you know what it says, sort of doctrinally, and not to be ignored.
Yeah, I also really like this story, the legend behind the 5 works of Maitreya. And I suppose in the spiritual world, there's so much we don't know. So it would be very wrong to dismiss anything as historical or untrue. But one of the things that is also very prominently associated with this legend is the message of compassion, isn't it? The story is told over and over again to show how important compassion is in on your path to enlightenment. So Asanga only seeing Maitreya after showing that intense compassion, and not really getting sight of Maitreya even after so many years of worshipping Maitreya. So
Yes.
it's a very beautiful moral of the story.
Absolutely, yes, that's a really crucial element in it. Yeah, yeah.